Have you ever wondered what it truly feels like to lose control of your own mind, not to another person, but to a hunger so violent it screams louder than your own thoughts? That question is where every nightmare in the World Eater's Legion begins. Long before the galaxy learned to fear their red and white armor, before their name became synonymous with butchery, there was a single, awful truth: no World Eater was born a monster. They were made into one, slowly, painfully, and with purpose. And the tragedy is that each of them remembered, at least for a time, what they used to be. That memory, that faint whisper of humanity, is what made their descent infinitely more horrifying. For many, the story starts on a world ruled by violence, where children learned the weight of a blade before the warmth of kindness. These were places where fear taught lessons faster than any mentor. The Legion found its recruits in soil soaked with blood, because only boys who had already tasted brutality could endure what would come next. From the moment they were taken, loaded into cold metal transports, and flown into the void, they learned the first commandment of the Legion they would soon serve: survival is a privilege, not a right. Even before the implants, even before the dreaded butcher's nails, the training itself broke them down. Day after day, drilled under merciless instructors, their bodies were pushed until they were trembling, then pushed further until they were simply numb. The nights were worse than the days. Quiet meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant death. In those silent hours, they lay awake with the knowledge that the child who slept beside them might not live to see the next dawn. There was no friendship, only temporary coexistence. The weak disappeared, the strong endured, and the instructors recorded it all as though it were a scientific experiment rather than a childhood stolen. Each recruit learned quickly that fear was useless here. Pain was constant, and hope was a liability. The only thing that mattered was obedience, absolute, unquestioning obedience. The Legion demanded everything: their strength, their minds, their futures. But none of them understood, not yet, the true cost that obedience carried. It was during this early training that whispers about the nails began. Older initiates sometimes muttered about them during the rare moments when the overseers weren't listening. They spoke of warriors who'd had something implanted into their brains, something that changed them. Something that hurt, something that took. The younger ones listened, unsure if these were warnings or legends. But all of them sensed the same cold truth: whatever the nails were, they were unavoidable. The instructors watched them with a chilling detachment, as if already measuring where inside each skull the horrors would eventually be carved. And yet, beneath the terror, something else took root: a dark, quiet pride. They were being shaped into tools, into weapons that would serve the greatest warlord humanity had ever known. They were told they would become saviors, liberators, the unstoppable fists of the Imperium. Each child clung to that idea, not because they believed it, but because it gave meaning to the agony they endured. Suffering without purpose is unbearable. Suffering for glory, that is something a young mind can almost accept. But that illusion would not survive for long. Because glory was not what awaited them. Mercy was not what shaped them. And the nails would hollow out the last remaining fragments of who they used to be. This was only the beginning. The first crack in a life destined to shatter. They were told it was an honor. They were told it was necessary. But when the day finally came, the day the recruits were marched into the cold, metallic chamber where the butcher's nails awaited, every one of them understood the truth: honor does not require shackles, and necessity does not scream like a trapped animal. The room smelled of antiseptic and blood, a combination that felt almost symbolic. It was as if the place had been designed to erase the line between healing and mutilation. And the recruits, stripped to their bare flesh, stood shivering as a dozen surgeons in mechanized harnesses prepared the instruments that would end their lives as thinking beings. One by one, they were forced onto surgical slabs that clamped down automatically, metal bands locking around wrists, ankles, and throats. Panic was pointless, the restraints were unyielding. Some tried anyway, thrashing until the clamps cut into their skin. Others simply closed their eyes and waited for the pain they knew was coming. Only a few remained stiff and silent, too numb to react. These would later be praised for their composure, though the truth was far simpler: fear had exhausted them. The surgeons worked without hesitation. There was no comfort offered, no reassurance. The moment a recruit lay still, heavy machinery descended, spiked arms humming, drills whining at a pitch that made teeth ache. And then the cutting began. The scalp was peeled back, the skull exposed, and the drills burrowed in. The pain was indescribable. It wasn't the sharp sting of a blade or the dull ache of bone. It was a fire, a grinding, vibrating assault that seemed to reach deeper than the body itself. Some screamed until their voices broke. Others convulsed so violently that multiple surgeons had to hold them down. The butcher's nails were not implants. They were violations. Tendrils of metal wormed into the brain, burrowing into regions responsible for restraint, emotion, reflection. They tore out the parts that calmed, soothed, or reasoned. In their place, the nails threaded circuits wired to reward only one sensation: violence. Every time a recruit resisted anger, the nails punished them with agony, sharp, electric bursts that clawed through the skull. But when they embraced aggression, the pain subsided, replaced by a brief, addictive relief. It was a perfect trap. The more they fought the nails, the more they suffered. The more they obeyed them, the less human they became. Hours passed before the last writhing body went still. Those who survived were left slumped on the slabs, trembling, gasping, or staring into nothing. A few never woke. A few woke screaming, but all of them woke changed. The silence in their minds, the comfortable space where thought had once lived, was gone. In its place was a constant, restless buzzing. At first, it was barely more than static. But as they sat up, as the surgeons released the clamps, as the cold air hit their exposed skulls, the buzzing sharpened. It grew louder, more demanding, more angry, and then the first wave of pain struck. It came without warning, a blast of burning pressure that detonated behind the eyes, squeezing the skull from the inside. Several recruits collapsed instantly, clutching their heads. Others staggered, choking on their own screams. The surgeons watched with the apathy of people who had seen this countless times before. They took notes as the boys writhed. They charted the intensity of the episodes, adjusted calibrations, and moved on. Soon the pain came again. And again. Faster this time. Harder. The buzzing grew sharper, like claws dragging across the inside of the skull. Thought became impossible. Memories flickered and died. Every attempt to remain calm only triggered another blast of agony. But when one recruit, driven to desperation, lashed out and struck the nearest surface, the pain stopped. Just for a moment, just long enough for the nails to whisper their first command. More. The recruits stared at their bloodied knuckles, their trembling hands, and felt the sickening truth settle inside them: violence was the only escape. Brutality was the only silence. To live without pain, they would have to destroy. From that moment on, the nails were not just inside their skulls. They were inside their futures, shaping every moment that would come after. The Legion's training would resume soon, but it would no longer focus on discipline, strategy, or unity. It would teach them only what the nails wanted: to kill, to break, to feed the hunger, to drown the screaming in their heads. This was the exact moment the World Eaters stopped being soldiers, and became slaves to rage. The days after the implantation were a blur of agony and confusion. The recruits, now half children, half weapons, were herded back into the training halls, though nothing about those halls felt familiar anymore. The floors were the same cold steel. The walls still echoed with the distant hum of machinery. But something fundamental had changed. The world no longer sounded the way it once did. Every footstep, every breath, every voice carried a sharp edge that made their skulls vibrate. Even silence wasn't silent. The nails filled that quiet with a constant, needling pressure, always waiting for the next spark of anger to ignite. Training no longer began with instruction. It began with pain. The moment they assembled, the overseers triggered the nails remotely, sending a synchronized wave of torment through every recruit's skull. It hit them like a hammer, bright, hot, all-consuming. The sharpest screams came from those who still tried to think their way through the suffering. Thought was now a punishable act. Calmness was treason against the nails. The overseers waited until every recruit was curled on the ground or staggering desperately to their feet, and only then did the true lesson begin. There were no lectures now. No tactical explanations. No demonstrations. Instead, weapons were thrown into the dirt. Brutal, inelegant things. Blades with serrated edges, clubs wrapped in chains, machetes dented from previous use. The message was painfully clear. Strategy would not define them. Precision would not elevate them. Only force mattered. The recruits were ordered to fight. Not formations. Not drills. Not sparring. Full, unrestrained violence. Some hesitated, clinging to the last remnants of discipline they had learned before the nails. Their hesitation was immediately punished. Their skulls exploded with pain, dropping them to their knees as their vision blurred with tears. The instructors demanded only one thing: rage. Anything less brought agony. Anything more brought momentary relief. And so the first blows were struck. Hesitant at first, a swing driven more by fear than anger. But the nails didn't care. They rewarded the act, dulling the internal screaming just enough for the recruits to notice. Relief washed through them like a drug. A dangerous, intoxicating drug that made the next strike easier. And the next, and the next. Soon, the hall filled with the wet sound of fists hitting flesh, of bones cracking, of bodies thudding against metal floors. The nails purred with satisfaction inside their skulls. The overseers watched from raised platforms, their faces expressionless as boys tore into one another with a ferocity that no child should possess. They didn't intervene when someone fell. They didn't stop the beating when someone surrendered. Weakness was a liability. Compassion was poison. Mercy was an infection. Only the strong survived, and only the angry grew stronger. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and each passing cycle erased more of who the recruits used to be. They forgot the sound of their own laughter. They forgot the softness of their childhood memories. The nails made sure of it. Whenever a thought drifted towards something peaceful, the machinery in their heads erupted with punishment. Whenever they hesitated before a blow, pain tore through their skulls. Whenever they showed even a flicker of hesitation, the agony doubled. Eventually, the recruits stopped resisting. They began to anticipate the violence, to crave the release it offered. They struck harder, faster, more eagerly. The nails rewarded them, whispering silently in their minds like a twisted heartbeat. The instructors noticed the change as well. The recruits no longer walked, they stalked. They no longer breathed, they growled. Conversations were replaced with snarls, shouts, and glares. The hall became an arena, and the arena became a furnace that burned away everything except the instinct to kill. But perhaps the most horrifying transformation was the growing emptiness behind their eyes. These were not soldiers in training. They were no longer human in any meaningful sense. They were creatures molded by agony, driven by an artificial hunger that gnawed at their sanity. Every lesson taught them to abandon restraint, logic, and empathy. Every punishment carved deeper into their minds the idea that violence was life, and life was violence. By the end of their training, the recruits could hardly remember who they had been before the nails. Their pasts were smudges. Their names were meaningless. All that remained was the constant need, the overwhelming compulsion to attack, to break, to bleed something or someone to silence the nails for another fleeting moment. And somewhere in the depths of their battered minds, each one felt the same quiet terror. If this is what training feels like, what will war do to us? War was never supposed to feel like relief. Yet, for the newly formed world eaters, the recruits shaped by torment, broken by the butcher's nails, and reforged in ceaseless brutality, the battlefield became the only place where the screaming in their minds finally softened. When the order came that they would join their Legion brothers in a real conflict, none of them felt fear. They didn't feel excitement either. What pulsed through their veins was something far more disturbing: anticipation. The nails throbbed with an almost eager hum, as if sensing that their true purpose was about to begin. Their first deployment was to a world already choking on war. Smoke curled into skies the color of ash, and cities lay fractured like bones shattered under a hammer. The recruits stepped out of the massive transport craft and into a storm of sound. Distant detonations, the roar of atmospheric winds, the faint echoes of screams carried across burning plains. The nails surged immediately, tightening like a vice around the base of their skulls. The pressure built, whispering its single demand: violence. And as always, the only escape from the pain was obedience. They were assigned to the front lines with no ceremony, no introduction, no explanation of their mission. Their commanders simply pointed toward the ruins ahead and gave a single word: advance. That was all the nails needed. The recruits surged forward, their senses sharpening into a narrow tunnel of purpose. The world blurred around them, not because of speed, but because the nails suppressed everything that wasn't directly connected to violence. Colors faded, sounds narrowed, even their own thoughts dimmed. The nails filtered reality into something simple: enemies ahead, pain behind. Only one direction offered relief. When the first enemy soldiers appeared, scrambling from behind the wreckage of a collapsed tower, the recruits didn't hesitate. The moment they saw movement, the nails fired a bolt of punishing agony through their skulls, commanding them to act. And so they charged, screaming, not from fear, but from the relief that surged through them with every step. The distance closed fast, too fast for the enemy to react, and then the recruits collided with them like a tidal wave of fury. The first kill was always the same: A blur of motion, a strike driven by instinct rather than technique. A crack, loud, wet, final. And then a sudden silence inside the mind. The nails stopped screaming. The pain vanished. This was the reward, the terrible bargain, the death of another granted a moment of peace. A hollow, aching peace that lasted only seconds, but felt like the sweetest relief they had known since before the surgery table. The battlefield erupted into chaos. The recruits slaughtered without coordination, without strategy, without restraint. They moved like predators unchained, each driven by the personal need to quiet the nails. Blades tore through armor. Gauntleted fists crushed bone. Some recruits roared as they fought, each sound a release of pent-up agony. Others fell silent, moving like machines with blood-slicked precision. But all of them struck with the same desperation, as if the nails might explode inside their skulls if they didn't spill enough blood fast enough. The enemy forces broke quickly. They had expected soldiers, disciplined warriors fighting under command. What they encountered instead were children twisted into monsters, charging through gunfire as though bullets were nothing more than irritating raindrops. A few enemies tried to surrender, dropping their weapons, holding out trembling hands. But mercy had no meaning for world eaters. The nails punished hesitation instantly, stabbing their minds with punishing electricity. The recruits killed the unarmed as quickly as they did the hostile, each death adding another fleeting second of silence. Their commanders watched from a distance, analyzing the carnage. They took notes on each recruit's performance, cataloging their reactions, noting which of them relied on instinct versus rage. To the commanders, this wasn't a battlefield. It was an evaluation, a test of the nails' effectiveness. A demonstration of how well agony could mold a mind into a weapon. When the fighting ended, the recruits stood amidst the bodies, breathing heavily. The nails were quiet now, not out of mercy, but because they had been fed. The silence was disturbing, a reminder that peace now came only through death. Some recruits stared at their bloodied hands, faint memories flickering at the edges of their minds. A name, a face, a life before the nails. But each time a memory surfaced, the nails growled, warning them away. The past was no longer theirs. Only the hunger remained. For the first time, they understood something horrifying. War wasn't their mission, war was their medication. A temporary cure for the torment inside their skulls. A cure that required more and more with every battle. This was only their first taste of blood. And already, they needed more. The battlefield did not just teach them to kill, it taught them to belong. Among the world eaters, camaraderie was not born from trust, loyalty, or friendship. It was born from a shared understanding of pain, hunger, and the insatiable demand of the nails. Every recruit, every veteran, every champion of the Legion carried the same unspoken truth: restraint was weakness, and mercy was death. Those who hesitated were punished, not just by the nails, but by the contemptuous eyes of their brothers. And the brothers themselves were relentless in testing one another, because only in the crucible of mutual violence could the strongest emerge. As the recruits fought alongside the older warriors, they noticed subtle patterns. A glance, a slight nod, a grunt, it all communicated more than words ever could. Coordination existed, but only as a tool to amplify the rage. Orders were secondary, the nails dictated their actions. And yet, within that chaos, something remarkable and terrifying occurred. The recruits began to recognize the hunger in their comrades. They saw it mirrored in their eyes, felt it in the cadence of their strikes. The nails were not alone inside them, they were shared, a communal pulse that bound them together in something far more primal than loyalty. Initiation into this twisted brotherhood came in the form of a test, a massacre, carefully orchestrated by their superiors. The recruits were assigned to a town caught between Imperial forces and renegade warbands. There was no subtlety in the mission. The town was to be eradicated, every building scorched, every street soaked in blood. The recruits hesitated only briefly. The nails demanded movement, and movement required killing. With each swing of a chainix or cleaving blow, the pain inside their skulls receded. With each scream, each broken bone, the nails rewarded them with moments of silence, and that silence became addictive. As the carnage unfolded, something terrifying happened inside the recruits' minds. They stopped counting the dead. Faces became meaningless. Names evaporated from memory. The human details, the cries of children, the pleas of the dying, the smell of burning flesh, were all reduced to data the nails could use. Pain and blood became their only reality, and in that reality, they felt alive in a way that was both horrifying and intoxicating. The more they surrendered to the nails, the more their own humanity slipped away, until rage and instinct were all that remained. The Brotherhood of Rage, as the veterans called it in hushed, brutalized tones, was complete when the recruits reached a moment of shared clarity. They were no longer individuals. Each one was a weapon, a conduit of violence honed by pain. The bonds of the Legion were not formed by affection, they were formed by shared torment and shared indulgence in bloodshed. To survive among them, a recruit had to abandon the very parts of themselves that once defined who they were: mercy, doubt, compassion, and accept the new truth. The nails controlled them, but together, the nails were unstoppable. The recruits who survived the initiation returned to the Legion not as children, not as men, but as instruments of unthinking fury. Their names were lost, their pasts were meaningless, they were no longer merely soldiers, they were embodiments of war itself, walking conduits of rage and slaughter. And while the nails had stolen their minds, the Brotherhood had stolen their wills. In the silence after the massacre, standing amidst the ruins of what was once a living town, the recruits felt a terrible exhilaration. They were free, but only because they were enslaved. Free to unleash the fury the nails demanded. Free to feed the hunger that now defined them. Free only within the boundaries of unimaginable torment. And deep in the corners of their minds, a quiet, terrifying thought began to take root. This is who we are. There is no going back. Time became meaningless for the World Eaters. Days, months, even years passed in a haze of carnage and fury, each battle blurring into the next. The nails were a constant, unrelenting presence in their skulls, whispering, punishing, demanding. Pain was no longer something they endured, it had become a guide, a teacher, a cruel and absolute compass that dictated every thought, every motion, every heartbeat. Logic, strategy, even instinct were secondary. Rage was the only reality. Every plan was executed through anger, every tactic sharpened by brutality, every victory stained with the blood of friend and foe alike. The recruits, now full warriors of the Legion, had learned that the nails did not merely demand violence, they demanded obsession. Any moment of hesitation, reflection, or remorse triggered bursts of agony so intense it could shatter bones from the inside. The slightest memory of a life before the nails brought excruciating pain. And yet, paradoxically, it was those faint, fleeting memories that kept some of them tethered, however tenuously, to what they had once been. A laugh, a smile, a word spoken in innocence, each fragment a needle that the nails used to twist, torment, and sharpen their hunger for slaughter. The world outside the Legion became irrelevant. Civilians, fellow soldiers, even entire planets were reduced to obstacles in an endless, bloody calculus. The nails rewarded efficiency, but it was efficiency powered by rage. They demanded not just killing, but killing with a personal investment, a depth of fury that made every act of violence intensely intimate. And in response, the World Eaters abandoned everything that could slow them down: empathy, reason, restraint. Humanity was a memory. Brotherhood was a weapon. And rage was salvation. Madness crept in silently. It began as a whisper, an echo of doubt, of fear, of fleeting guilt, but quickly grew into a chorus. Some warriors began to see visions of their victims, hear the screams of the dead when no one else was around, feel phantom pain in the limbs they had destroyed. The nails amplified these sensations, not to punish, but to teach. Pain without context made reality malleable. Reality became subjective. Only the next act of violence provided clarity, a brief, terrifying sense of normalcy. The horrors of the battlefield were no longer enough. The Legion began to crave personal, intimate brutality. Slaughter became ritual. Pain became a communion. The nails thrummed like a heartbeat, urging them deeper, faster, harder. And the more they listened, the more they felt themselves dissolve, fragment, and be reborn as instruments of unrelenting rage. Madness was no longer a possibility, it was inevitable. And they embraced it because, without madness, there was only unbearable, unending suffering. Yet even as they descended, something remarkable persisted. Beneath the skull-splitting agony, beneath the unrelenting compulsion to destroy, a flicker of something recognizably human remained. A question, whispered faintly in the recesses of their minds: are we still men, or are we just the nails made flesh? The answer never came. Only more blood, only more pain, only the ceaseless pull of the rage that had replaced their very souls. And in that eternal descent, one truth became unavoidable: the World Eaters were no longer creatures of flesh and bone. They were manifestations of fury itself, unstoppable, unthinking, and horrifyingly alive. There comes a moment in every World Eater's life when the nails have won entirely, when the last shreds of thought, restraint, and memory are stripped away, leaving only the raw, pulsating hunger for destruction. That moment is not marked by fanfare, nor by ceremony, nor even by the cries of the dying. It is quiet, absolute, and terrifying. A warrior stands amidst the carnage, heart pounding not from exertion, but from an internal need that cannot be reasoned with, bargained with, or ignored. Pain is no longer punishment, it is life itself, the only metric by which existence can be measured. And for the World Eater who has reached this apex, humanity is nothing more than a myth, a cruel joke whispered by ghosts that the nails quickly silence. The first realization is subtle. A hesitation that once existed, the faint memory of fear, remorse, or pity, is gone. Thoughts that might have questioned orders, morality, or consequence vanish instantly. The world is reduced to action and reaction, stimulus and response, predator and prey. Each swing of a chainix, each roar that tears from their throat, each enemy's death, is measured against one criterion: does it quiet the nails? If it does, relief floods the skull like a poisonous elixir. If it does not, the agony ratchets higher, becoming unbearable, until the warrior obeys, lashes out, and kills again. The transformation is not just mental, it is physical. Muscles tighten, reflexes sharpen, and pain becomes fuel. Bruises, broken bones, and wounds are ignored, overlooked, even welcomed, because they bring focus, a connection to the present that nothing else can provide. Scars multiply like a map of a life once lived, now rewritten entirely in blood. The nails hum in triumph, synchronizing with the pounding heart of their host, guiding them toward ever greater acts of carnage. And then comes the battlefield, a world teeming with life, with enemies, with the fragile illusion of morality. The World Eater no longer hesitates, no longer weighs choices, no longer fears. Strategy is meaningless, tactics are irrelevant, only the immediate demand of the nails matters: destruction. Planets are razed, armies are shattered, cities are leveled under the unrelenting storm of fury. Witnesses, soldiers, civilians, even other Astartes, fall, not because they were defeated, but because the World Eaters no longer distinguish friend from foe. Violence is all that exists. The most terrifying aspect is not the slaughter itself, but the ecstasy that accompanies it. Pain has become pleasure, blood has become sustenance, rage has become purpose, and the warrior, once human, now nothing more than a conduit of fury, realizes something both horrifying and liberating: there is no fear, no hesitation, no morality left to hold them back. Only the nails, and the glory of complete surrender to their command. In this state, the World Eaters are unstoppable. Minds erased, bodies honed, souls hollowed, yet utterly alive in the singular reality of violence. Their names are forgotten, their pasts meaningless, their humanity extinguished. What remains is pure, unthinking, devastating fury. The galaxy itself feels their presence before they arrive. Planets quake at the sound of their approach, not because of the armies they bring, but because they are the embodiment of relentless annihilation. And even as the bodies pile up, and screams echo across the ashes of countless worlds, a faint, horrifying truth lingers in the minds of those few who remember: the World Eaters are not merely soldiers of war, they are the war itself, and war is eternal. Even for the most seasoned World Eaters, there comes a moment when the nails no longer merely guide, they dominate, twisting perception until the line between reality and hallucination is obliterated. The battlefield fades into a blur of red, fire, and screaming, and the warrior can no longer distinguish whether the cries belong to the living or the dead. Every shadow hides a threat, every movement demands annihilation, and the nails roar in jubilation with every act of violence, driving the warrior further into the void. What was once rage becomes mania, and what was once control is entirely lost. The abyss opens quietly at first. A fleeting thought of something lost, a memory of a mother, a brother, a friend, appears unbidden, only to be crushed by the nails with lightning pain. The warrior clutches at these fragments, desperate to remember, desperate to hold on to a shred of self. But the nails are merciless. The deeper they claw, the more agony erupts, and the warrior learns quickly that survival demands surrender. Thoughts are no longer tools. Feelings are weaknesses. Hope is a hallucination. Only fury remains, pure and unrelenting. Isolation intensifies the descent. Even among fellow World Eaters, each warrior exists alone, trapped within the confines of a mind consumed by the nails. The Brotherhood of Rage, once a source of twisted unity, now feels like a distant echo. Allies are as much targets as enemies, for hesitation or weakness triggers the nails' relentless punishment. In moments of quiet, if such moments can be called that, the warrior confronts the horrifying realization: the hunger cannot be satisfied. There is no end, no pause, no peace. Each act of destruction only fuels the need for the next, and each fleeting silence is merely the calm before a storm that will never abate. Visions begin to haunt the warrior. Faces of the slain emerge in flickers of shadow. Screams echo in the mind without source. The nails amplify these apparitions, rewarding violence toward them with brief relief, punishing hesitation with excruciating agony. Each kill becomes simultaneously a necessity and a torment, a vicious cycle of craving and punishment. The warrior begins to question reality itself. Do the screams come from others, or are they manifestations of their own fractured psyche? Are the apparitions real, or are they the nails' cruel joke, feeding insanity to perfect obedience? And yet, even on the edge of this abyss, there is a terrible clarity. The World Eater knows the truth. They are no longer human, not in mind, not in soul. Humanity is gone, ground into dust by the nails and refined into rage. The only path forward is surrender, complete, absolute, and unflinching, to the compulsion that drives them. To fight is to live, to hesitate is to suffer beyond endurance. The warrior embraces the inevitability of their fate, stepping willingly into the storm of blood and fire that has become the only measure of existence. This is the precipice. Beyond it lies either total annihilation or transcendence into something far more horrifying than death. And in that moment, as the nails hum with the satisfaction of absolute control, the warrior feels a shiver of anticipation, a perverse thrill that the end is not yet here. For even at the edge of madness, one truth remains: there is always more to destroy, and the hunger never dies. By now, the World Eaters had become something the galaxy could barely comprehend. Entire worlds had learned the sound of their approach, the distant thrum of engines, the roar of a legion moving as one, and beneath it all, the pulse of the nails driving them toward inevitable carnage. No battlefield could contain them. No enemy force could endure more than moments in their presence. And yet, despite the devastation surrounding them, the warriors themselves were not triumphant in the sense of pride or achievement. Victory was meaningless. It was only another temporary respite from the agony that demanded violence, demanded rage, demanded more. In the chaos of war, the nails guided every strike with terrifying precision. The World Eaters were no longer soldiers, they were living conduits of destruction. Each kill provided a brief, fleeting silence in the storm of torment within their minds, but as quickly as it came, the craving returned, sharper and more insistent. Battlefields became arenas of personal torment as well as tactical engagement. Every swing, every stomp, every scream was measured against the nails' constant judgment. Hesitation was agony, hesight was death, compliance was life, but only until the hunger demanded more. And so, the warriors moved in waves of fury, almost choreographed by the nails themselves. Planets fell under their relentless advance, cities turned to smoldering ruins, and countless armies crumbled under their assault. Yet, paradoxically, the most terrifying battles were not against armies, but against the fleeting remnants of their own humanity. Moments of recognition, seeing the fearful eyes of a child, hearing the last words of a dying man, flared in the mind, only to be extinguished by the nails' unforgiving insistence. There was no mercy, and there could be none. To pause was to invite unbearable pain, to reflect was impossible, to resist was suicide. Even the brotherhood of rage, the tenuous camaraderie formed through shared torment, became a tool for annihilation. Warriors spurred one another into greater violence, taunting hesitation, celebrating bloodshed, and punishing any perceived weakness. The nails hummed in harmony with this symphony of fury, their influence absolute. Each warrior became a living weapon not only in body, but in spirit, a perfect storm of muscle, rage, and ceaseless torment. And through it all, the question that had first flickered in their minds, the faint whisper of who they had once been, was erased entirely. Names, faces, memories, morality, all obliterated. What remained was singular. The unyielding, all-consuming compulsion to destroy, to kill, to feed the hunger that had replaced thought itself. The World Eaters were unstoppable. The universe had not witnessed anything like them. Entire systems were left in ruins, yet the nails whispered, more, more, more. In this relentless tide of violence, one truth became undeniable. The World Eaters were not merely agents of war. They were war incarnate, a living, breathing apocalypse, and nothing, not even death itself, could ever halt the storm they had become. And so it ends, not with a bang, not with a sigh, but with the ceaseless, unrelenting pulse of the nails echoing through skulls that no longer belong to men. The World Eaters do not die. They do not rest. They do not remember. What once were children, what once were humans with laughter and hope, are now eternal instruments of destruction. Each warrior is a storm, each legionnaire a conduit of fury that consumes everything in its path, leaving only ashes, silence, and the faint echo of screams for company. The galaxy trembles before them, not out of respect, not out of fear of defeat, but because the World Eaters embody a horror that cannot be reasoned with, bargained with, or mitigated. To face them is to face annihilation itself. To fight them is to fight a universe of rage. And yet, behind the relentless slaughter, behind the blood-soaked victories and the planets reduced to dust, the nails hum their eternal song. The hunger has no satisfaction. The fury has no end. The abyss inside each skull is infinite, and the warriors continue to feed it, endlessly, inevitably, mercilessly. In this final truth lies the ultimate terror. There is no redemption, no salvation, no return to what they once were. Names are meaningless, faces forgotten, memories erased. Only the hunger remains, guiding them, feeding them, shaping them into something that is neither soldier nor man, but a walking apocalypse. The World Eaters are not a story of triumph or tragedy, they are a story of inevitability. A cautionary tale whispered in the ashes of conquered worlds. This is what becomes of humanity when rage is honed into a weapon and mercy is purged entirely. And as the fires of countless worlds burn, as screams echo in the void, and as the nails hum their eternal, maddening song, one chilling certainty remains: the World Eaters will never stop. They will never tire. They will never be contained. Their hunger is eternal. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.